why are there two sexes? And why are they so different, right? I mean, wouldn't life be so much simpler if there weren't two different sexes, right?
Okay.
Evolutionarily,
Huh?
it causes a lot of complications, and we just accept this fact, right? So
Yes.
we need to question. That's what this channel is about, right?
Just confirming, we are talking biology and not any of the other political discussions.
We are going to talk about biology and evolution and mathematics. There are fascinating mathematical reasons why there are two sexes and not 3 or 4 or 7 or just one. Okay?
Fair enough.
So, and during this journey, we are going to talk about bacteria, we will talk about plants and flowers and birds and bees. Okay?
Birds and bees.
Yeah.
Really, we are going to have the birds and bees talk.
No. So this episode is safe for any 13-year-old or above child who has been introduced to reproduction in school. Okay.
Okay.
Right?
I was worried we were going to have birds and bees
No.
talks before the parents had a chance to have the
Yeah,
talk with their
right.
kids. But if there are any 13-year or younger kids, please defer this at a later date.
Yeah. Okay. So why are there two sexes? The simple answer, which many of you might kind of vaguely remember from school, is that this is for genetic diversity, right?
Yeah.
For having variations in our genes. So the basic theory is that two organisms get together and they have a lot of offspring who have many different combinations of genes.
Correct.
Some of those will be good genes which increase chances of survival, and some are bad genes which decrease chances of survival.
Correct.
So the offspring which have bad genes will die out. The ones with good genes will live longer. And slowly over time, that just means that the whole population will have better and better genes. Make sense?
Yeah, that is what we are usually taught and told in school.
Yeah. This answer is too simple. Okay. Doesn't quite work because this answer doesn't require two sexes. Even bacteria can do this. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. Okay. The way bacteria reproduce is by splitting.
Correct.
Right? One bacteria makes two copies
Of
itself. So both sets are getting the same set of genes.
Correct.
Except that there is also mutation happening, right? So the two copies get slightly different genes because of mutations. Not only that, but bacteria have machinery in there which can increase the rate of mutation or decrease it, right?
Okay.
So when they want to adapt to the environment, right? When things are bad and they're having difficulty surviving, what they do is they increase the rate of mutation so that there is much more variation, and as a result, more of them die because of bad mutations, but there will be some who survive because of good mutations. Right?
When you say more of them die, the lineages die.
Yeah.
Along with the bacteria also, because they just can't reproduce.
Right. And also what the bacteria do is that when the environment is good, the bacteria have found a set of genes that work well in this situation, then they reduce the rate of mutation and then they're just making copies with fewer changes, right? So all of this works.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was just thinking. All of this sounds good enough. It works, but you're saying it's not good enough.
Correct. Because now imagine the following problem, okay, which the bacteria can face. That there is one particular organism which has some good genes and some bad genes.
Fair.
Okay. The good genes are really good, so that is helping them survive. But there are bad genes which are kind of a drag. Okay. Now, what happens is that because of those good genes, this particular lineage of bacteria, they keep surviving and they keep growing.
But the bad genes also keep surviving and growing.
So this is pretty much, the bad genes are hitchhiking a ride on the good genes, and the mutation system is not precise enough to just get rid of those bad genes, right?
Right.
Once in a while, if it was just one bad gene, then a random mutation could take it out. But usually genes are a combination of many different things.
Fair.
So it becomes quite difficult.
Okay.
Now compare this with the sexual reproduction, which is not splitting, but it is called crossover.
Okay.
So there are two different organisms. They have two sets of DNA. And then you take half the DNA from here, a randomly picked half, and half the DNA from the other side. So now you have two halves. Okay, these two half cells, which are called gametes, but I'll just refer to them as half cells, right? These two half cells which have half the genes of the parent, when they mix together, that's when you get an offspring.
Correct.
Right? Which means that you get in a single offspring, you get a chance to get rid of a whole lot of genes from this side and pick a whole lot of genes from that side.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So now, just through randomness.
Okay. Exactly. All of this is still random. So
Right,
there is a possibility that some bad will also come.
Oh, yeah, no. Think about this. The offspring they will have. Okay? Let's say that there are just this parent has good genes and bad genes. Okay? And this parent is just neutral, just for simplicity.
Okay.
Okay? There will be some offspring who have both the good genes and the bad genes. There will be some offspring who have only the bad, some who have only the good, and some who have neither of those.
Okay.
Right? You will notice that the good plus bad, the only bad, and neither of those, all three of these are inferior.
Correct.
Whereas the only good is clearly better than all these.
So that lineage will continue.
Correct. So now, just through sheer randomness, you produced a lot of offspring, out of which only the good ones will continue, and we managed to get rid of the bad.
Oh, so crossover is clearly superior to splitting, which was the original example you gave. So why can't bacteria do crossover?
That's an excellent question, right? Crossovers have been discovered. They've been around for 3 billion years. So why didn't bacteria use that, right? A couple of simple answers, right? One is that doing crossover requires much more complex molecular machinery, which the bacteria don't have. Second is that bacteria are single-celled animals, right? So the rate of mutation for bacteria is fairly low. And so they don't really need this level of sophistication. Okay? It's only when you get more complex organisms, multicellular organisms, the rate of mutation grows. Okay? And as a result, that is where it becomes necessary and important to have more sophisticated methods of getting rid of bad genes.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Right. And this is where mitochondria also come in. Right? The point is that multicellular animals, right, because they are more complex, their DNA needs to have many more genes with much more instructions on how to build that complex organism, right?
Right.
So mutation rate is higher, but also because they are bigger, they need much more energy to survive, right? And that energy only comes from mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, right?
Right.
There is a big negative to mitochondria. Because it is the powerhouse of the cell, it is converting a lot of energy. And as a result, the side effects of that energy process, right, is a whole bunch of oxidants which actually increase the mutation rate. They cause a whole bunch of damage. And so, if you have mitochondria, you definitely need crossover because, you know, there is so much more damage in the DNA that needs to be fixed.
So mitochondria are providing the energy to make this crossover happen, but in the process, they are also polluting the environment and therefore mutations are happening.
Absolutely, yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
But then the question arises, why do multicellular organisms have two different sexes? Why can't they do it with just one sex, unisex?
Another excellent question, right? In fact, this exists.
Really?
Plants. There are no male plants and female plants separately, right? The same plant does have male parts and female parts. The pollen is the male part and the stigma is the female part, right?
I remember biology.
Correct. But the point is that all the plants of, say, a rose are more or less the same type. Okay? And here, any plant can mate with any other, pollinate with any other plant to produce offspring. Right? You don't, this particular rose doesn't have to go out searching only for female roses, if you know what I mean. Right?
Okay.
And so the life of a rose is much simpler, like I said. What is the problem with this situation? Okay. Now, for a plant like this, there are two types of reproduction. There is cross-pollination in which pollen from this plant pollinate the stigma of this plant.
Correct.
Or there is self-pollination where pollen from the same plant can pollinate the stigma of the plant and result in offspring which have more or less the same DNA. So it is a little bit like bacteria, but it is not exactly splitting. Okay, so far this is clear?
Somewhat. So when a plant pollinates with itself, you get the same kind of plant, I'm guessing?
Yeah, the DNA will be same, so everything will be pretty much identical.
So a red rose self-pollinating with itself will create red roses.
Yeah.
A red rose pollinating with a yellow rose creates an orange rose. I'm just making things up at this point.
No, that's a very rare situation, right? The more common thing is that there is this red rose which is resistant to a certain kind of pest. Okay, and this red rose which can thrive in less water.
Okay.
Right? So when these two combine, you will get a red rose which is resistant to the pest and needs less water.
Oh,
Whereas
okay.
if this one just self-pollinates, you will get the same rose which is resistant to the pest but doesn't have the advantages of that, and vice versa, right?
Got
So
it.
this is what is going on roughly.
Got it. Okay.
The problem with all of this is that cross-pollination is difficult. You literally have to involve the bees and the birds to do the cross-pollination, right? It's difficult, it takes more effort, and it might not work and all of that. Whereas self-pollination is so easy that if given a choice, everybody would be doing self-pollination.
I mean, we all love ourselves, so
Right?
yeah.
Right? So you can just imagine if you are told go to a party and just spend time with yourself and your phone in a corner versus go and you have to talk to a stranger, which will most guys prefer, right? So
If I'm told I have to go to talk to a stranger, then I will of course do that. But I would honestly prefer sometimes just being on the phone.
right,
No,
but
just kidding.
see, here is the main point.
Huh.
That cross pollination has all the advantages that we talked about earlier.
Yes.
Right? Whereas self-pollination has disadvantages. But evolution is lazy, so self-pollination is what will happen, and then that species will die out.
Right.
Whereas one of those species, just through random mutation, develops something called self-incompatibility, right? Which means that pollen from this plant cannot fertilize the stigma from the same plant because of some way that the molecules are set up, right?
Right.
This is the case of where you are forced, you are not given a phone, so you are forced to go talk to a stranger, right?
Okay.
In that case, that particular lineage is going to cross-pollinate. They don't have a choice, and then they will have all the advantages of cross-pollination, and they will keep thriving more and more, and slowly they will drive out the others, right?
Any examples of this self-incompatibility that you just explained in?
So first of all, in plants there are lots, right? So I mean, if you just go through the list, I mean, there is, for example, tobacco has self-incompatibility.
Right.
There's a long list. But what also happened is that those plants later on figured out how to do the self-incompatibility by splitting into males and females, where now the entire animal kingdom is males and females, which is this forced self-incompatibility. A male cannot
mate with itself, himself, itself. Yeah, whatever it is.
Correct,
Got
right?
it.
So that's the reason why you have two different sexes which are incompatible with the self, right? So that forces the cross-pollination to happen, which is a good thing.
What you've said so far makes complete sense to me, but I also notice that a lot of this is mathematics and theory. So I assume that there has to be some experimental validation of this, of crossover being superior or whatever.
I'm glad you asked that, right? This channel is about data and science and
Yes.
experiments. So what they did was experiments with yeast, okay? Yeast has the ability to do self-pollination as well as cross-pollination.
Okay.
So what the scientists did was they set up experimental conditions so that this yeast, on one side, they were forced to self-pollinate.
With yeast, is it called self-pollination?
No, it is called asexual reproduction versus sexual reproduction, but these terms are easier to understand.
Okay,
right?
fine. Self-pollination, asexual reproduction, cross-pollination, sexual reproduction.
Right.
Go on.
So on one side, the yeast was forced to self-pollinate. On the other side, it was forced to cross-pollinate. Okay?
Right.
And then they looked at the results, right, of the different genes in there and the survival rates. Okay. Now in these graphs look a little difficult, but I'm going to explain, right? So every line on this graph is one of the genes.
Okay.
Orange line is a good gene. A blue line is a bad gene.
Okay.
And the y-axis, height, shows how many of that genes survived.
Right.
Okay. So basically a line going up.
Wait, the x-axis is over time, over multiple reproduction generations?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
right. So a line going up means that that gene has succeeded, and a line going down means that that gene died out, right?
Correct.
Now the upper graph is the self-pollination, asexual reproduction, and you can see that a whole bunch of orange genes have succeeded,
Very
but
early on.
along with them, a whole bunch of blue genes have also succeeded. And in fact, you can see that every blue gene that succeeded is near some orange. So
Correct.
that is clearly a blue gene free riding upon an orange gene.
The hitchhiking thing you talked about.
Hitchhiking, right? But in sexual reproduction, it starts out similar. But soon you see that the blue and the orange get separated, the blue get kicked out and they die out, whereas the orange remain, right? So clear proof that cross-pollination is superior to
self-pollination.
Yeah?
Okay, so this graph explains the importance of cross-pollination, of sexual reproduction, of crossover, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And it means that it has to be two different sexes. It has to be a pollen and a stigma. It has to be a male and a female.
Yeah.
But why do they have to be different?
Yeah, great question, right? And to understand this, you have to understand that survival isn't just about good genes and gene variation.
Okay.
Survival has one more important part. Imagine the little offspring that has been created, the embryo, right? It has to grow. While growing, it needs a bunch of things. First of all, it needs energy and nutrition to grow.
Right.
It needs some sort of protection, a protective shell or something else. It needs sensors to check whether the environment is conducive or not, whether it should go to the next stage or not, all of these things, right? Now imagine how this could be implemented, right? You're doing crossover, so you have these two half cells, these gametes, right? Now, which of these gametes is carrying around all these extra resources in addition to just the good genes, right? It is like a person traveling with three huge trunks, okay? This would just make it difficult for them to travel around and look around for partners, right?
Right.
Mathematically, it is so much more easier if a small number of them carried all these extra resources and stayed in one place, whereas all the others travel light and they're running around trying to look for these people with resources, right?
Right.
This is exactly what is happening. The small number carrying around all these resources are the egg, which contains the yolk, which is the nutrition, and a shell, and a whole bunch of other things, and they stay in one place. Whereas the travel light with so many different variations, these are the sperm, 100 million of them, all going around. And then when an egg and a sperm meet, they have a great combination. You got a lot of variation, and then you got this embryo which has a lot of resources by which you can survive.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Right? So mathematically, it is just so much more optimal for these two half cells to split into two different functions. One which is stationary and has resources, and the other which is mobile and travels light. Make sense?
Makes sense.
This also explains why there are not 3 or 4 or 5 sexes, right? Just mathematically think about this. These are our two ends, right? Mobility versus resources. So it makes sense for one type to go all the way to this end, another type to go all the way to this end. If there was a third sex, where would it go? If it is like in the middle, it is like, it'll get outcompeted by the female for resources and outcompeted by the male for mobility, right? What's the purpose of this middle one to exist, right? So mathematically, this is more optimal, just having two which are at two ends of our spectrum.
I just want to point out, this is not a gender discourse. This is a sexual reproduction discourse. Biology, and not gender.
Yeah.
We are talking in terms of that.
Yeah.
Please do not mistake that. But coming back to my original question, what I also meant to ask was, why do the male and female of a species look so different? I mean, it could basically be one same shell with just different parts inside.
Right. So using the same arguments, you can say that it makes sense for evolution to say that the female is the one in charge of nurturing the child, right? Whereas the male is in charge of going out and finding resources and food and so on, right? Now, because the females are in charge of resources, even when the child is gestating and after the child is born, that's why biologically they have to be different, right? Wide hips, they have to have breasts and so on, which the males don't need. Makes sense so far?
Yes.
And similarly for the males, it makes sense for them to have more endurance, for them to have bigger muscles, and later on in, when tribes and societies are formed, for them to be the ones with more status, right? And who is respected by the tribe.
Kind of, because while the female is gestating the embryo, she will have to remain in seclusion for 9 months. She will have to be protected for 9 months. So the male has to take on the role of that protector and make sure that the female of the species is safe.
I mean, in early evolution, it has to be the male who is stronger, and in later evolution, it has to be the male who has better status in the tribe.
Kind of. It evolves from there socially, which is another discussion. We'll not have that right now, but makes sense.
Right.
Okay.
The problem is that this goes too far, right? So the male is looking for the hips and the breasts and so on, right? And evolution works by making the male attracted to these things. As a result, the females start developing more of those, and this just keeps continuing and goes past the point of being useful, right? And this is called something called Fisherian runaway. Okay. So this is just unnecessarily evolving in that direction, so that now males are attracted to things which don't really produce any advantages. But what are you going to do?
Did you just explain the male fetishes of large size?
It is called Fisherian runaway problem.
Okay.
But let's get back to the basic point. Okay. The summary of this episode is that cross-pollination has significant advantages over, just splitting and bacterial and asexual reproduction.
Yes.
It is to do with interspecies. It is not about interspecies competition, right? Within the species, it is competition between good genes versus bad genes, and good genes versus better genes, and how to get the best genes in one combination, right? And the more important point I want to make is that everything, even the things you take most for granted, has a good mathematical reason if you just ask why enough times, right?
Yeah, first principles. It all keeps coming back to the first principles. And in this case, even though it is a subject of biology, the first principles, as we just established, were mathematics and statistics.
Right.
Which is fascinating when you think about it.
Right.
And I never thought that the answer to the question, why are there exactly two sexes, would be given by mathematics in conjunction with biology.
Right.
Biomathematics, some kind of. But there it is. And biology and evolution, in that sense, is a very fascinating thing to think about in terms of this mathematical statistical lens. And if you like thinking in that lens, there is another episode for you that we line up now, which discusses how the eye must have evolved. Go check that out. Shrikant, Naveen, futureiq.